Circle of Doom. All right, we are live again with the 12-Cent Treehouse. I am Sean McLaughlin, writer-producer, here with a pit bull pulling on my arm. Hopefully he's not going to chew it off. And with me, as almost always, is Scott Collins, the lovely and talented.
Hey, everybody.
Steve Jones, who's usually with us, is working at a new animation studio in Auckland, New Zealand, which I hope he will talk about the next time we get him on. And Jeff Johnson is off doing family stuff. So you have the two of us here today, and we've decided to do a freeform show while I wrestle with Comet the Pitbull. And we were just going to talk about anything that we thought about with the business. And I have a certain idea. And Scott, what about you? Does there anything sparking?
Yeah, I had something that popped in my head that was continuing from a post that I made earlier in the week on my socials and stuff. But let's start with yours. What you got?
I wanted to say, I understand business, and I understand that you want to make as much money off a character as you can.
Yeah.
But is there any benefit to resting a character sometimes and not overflowing the market with product about that character? Say perhaps a millionaire playboy who masquerades as a bat at night.
Right.
Do we really need 25 Batman books every month in different versions of him? And is that cheapening the character in some way?
A little bit of column A, a little bit of column B, from what I understand or have experienced. Now, something like Batman or whatever that has lasted already some, 30 years, whatever, or more. I think that's a slightly different problem than some other ones. But like I've heard about like music bands, that when the new band forms and they actually hit or they do fairly well or whatever it is, their management is all over them to constantly tour, quick, get on another album, quick, because they look at it that you only have this window in entertainment. You've got like 3 years, maybe 5 years tops, unless you are the Beatles or, somebody, the Rolling Stones or whatever. You can actually make a whole lifetime career, but most bands don't. Or most bands, even if they stay together, their hottest time is only a certain time period where the public is interested in them, that kind of thing. But as far as this stuff goes with Batman or Hawkman at DC or I don't know, even like Doctor Strange maybe at Marvel or whatnot, they don't seem like they hold that well. And I've heard that at different times when I've tried to work with partners or otherwise put proposals together for, say, a Hawkman, that they're like, nope, we just ran that last miniseries and it's only been a year or it's only been 6 months or we are just closing it down now. So I thought it would have been the right time for me to propose for the next thing. And they're like, nope, we're not going to do anything of his own book for like 2 years or 3 years. And it also depends on, I think, how bad the previous time frame of something being out there, how well it went over. If it goes over fine, sure, they'd be looking for another one. And maybe just a change or a new way of doing something. But if it crashes and burns and the last, Potato Man series really didn't do well, then they're going to be like, no. We got to make the retailers and everybody forget what happened last time. So that by the time we bring it around, they're not even immediately going like, but that Potato Man was all during the daylight and we want a nighttime Potato Man, whatever it was.
Right. I was thinking about what made me think about it was things like Better Call Saul and Pluribus, where, nobody lost money on those.
Yeah.
But Pluribus now they're saying it's going to be 3 years until the second series comes out. Vince Gilligan says it takes that long to write them. And so like with Hawkman, take Hawkman as an example.
Yeah.
I think we both worked. You worked on Hawk. You did a pitch, and I did an issue and did a pitch for a continuing.
And he's guest starred in some books I've drawn. Yeah.
Yeah. If you have a successful Hawkman, even a minorly successful Hawkman, do you want to do a full series right away, or do you want to maybe do another miniseries? Like the British TV used to do that. They would do like 6 to 13 episodes a year and not run it into the ground. And then it becomes more popular. And you think like novels come out once a year. So is there a benefit, I think, in resting a character sometimes? And Batman really is completely overexposed. I mean,
yeah.
They're
But
obviously
still,
making money on it, but
he's overexposed until they come out with Absolute Batman, and then everyone goes bonkers again for it. So it's one of those longer concepts that's proven to be resourceful and come back and bounce back, and maybe hit some dry spells, but be something that the public anyway seems to be still interested in here, 50, whatever, 75, 200 years later.
Well, like Sherlock Holmes, there's a limited amount of Sherlock Holmes stuff.
Yes. The thing with Sherlock Holmes, which eventually, Superman and Batman and all of those are headed in that same direction, is it gets difficult to either reinterpret it in a modern sense, or the reinterpretations are a little too easy, too expected, too fitting the norms or whatnot. So it doesn't even hardly seem like it's new.
Right.
That other bit that you mentioned about, was that?
Better Call Saul and Pluribus?
No, but it was about taking the time on whether or not to go ahead and do more material right away as a miniseries or a regular monthly series. Hi, Comet. Is that we have a special guest star today, everybody. Comet is our guest star. For a while, I was working on the Flash comic book, and DC made a whole round, this is like 2019 or something like that, where they had decided, instead of trying again for, say, a Hawkman or a Demon or some of their B-level guys that just never seem to quite make it in a regular monthly book, sometimes you'll come up with miniseries of those characters. Well, during this one year where they're looking for different things to do and ways to bump up their sales, they went, you know what? We're not going to do those this year. Maybe like 2 years even, or something like that. We're like, if they show up in books, fine, but we're not going to try and do, say, a Demon miniseries right now. What we're going to do instead, and to keep their numbers on the sales and the thing going on and everything else, to make up for that material that they're not creating there, they decided all the major books, Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, Flash, Green Lantern, maybe Justice League, and some other ones like that again too, they made them bi-weekly.
Oh.
Now, you still need 2 or 3 creative teams to match that speed of a book, and come up with it that long. So there was a run I did on Flash where it was a bi-weekly book. So, and I had done that on some Marvel books as well, on Avengers and stuff, where I may only get 4 or 6 issues in a row for a story arc or something like that, because by the time I'm done with it, the deadline's caught up and we can't keep doing it bi-weekly. So they have the other guy working on it at the same time. Now you have only 1 writer or 2 writers that are coordinating all this stuff ahead of time, and the writers can usually handle that without too much problem. But the answer to that was still a very positive one, as far as I ever heard anyway. All during that time, Flash sales bumped up. In general, they bumped up. And you know what's even funnier? And I do not know why this is, because the numbering of it would change. It wasn't like it was a big issue number, and I don't think it mattered necessarily between one kind of creator or different kind of creator going on. Whichever one was the first one of that month, say if there were 2 issues of Flash coming out that month, and one was 700, one was not 700. 335 or 336, whichever one was at the beginning of the month sold better. The one in the second half of the month sold just a little bit worse. Why? I don't know.
It's continuing the same story.
Yep. And then next month, the same thing. The first one of the month sells a little bit more. The second of the month sells just a little bit less. I mean, we're only talking like 3, maybe 5,000 copies or something fairly small. But and as far as I know of, it happened across the board. It happened on Wonder Woman, Superman, any of them, Green Lantern, all that stuff.
I wonder if that's because people are used to only buying 1 a month, and then their pull lists and stuff don't have the second one. That's really interesting, though. That would be something that'd be really interesting to look more into. How about, were you getting as much work? Were you getting as much or more work because you were doing like 4 in a row and then trading off?
So I talked to the editor at the time when they offered it, and everything seemed cool and copacetic, that I was going to get monthly work. They offered me to be another guy that was monthly on the book. And I said, okay. And then they told me the strategy. And I went, well, wait a minute. What does that mean? Am I actually going to get 12 issues or something a year or something close to it? Because I'm that kind of guy who could do that, especially at that time. And they said yes. And the writer came to town. He went to a convention and I was nearby. So I went there and we had a nice little chat and a dinner and whatnot. And he said, yep, absolutely. Don't worry about it. You're going to be getting like at least something like 10, 12 issues a year. There might be a hiccup here or there, but We will be keeping you busy the whole time. You don't need to work for side work or anything like that. And we did, I think, for about 2 years worth. And then they
That's
changed the
awesome.
plan because, you know, the different, you always need to do something else to goose up sales or keep interest.
Gee, I wouldn't think if I were like a producer doing something like that and it was working, I would say, why do we have to change what's working? Why do we just keep doing this till it stops working?
It's possible. I don't remember seeing the sales factors change, but it's possible that after those 2 years or so that it did kind of peter out a little bit. But it also just might have been the thing where, you know, some executives would want you to go, yes, do this, only do Superman and Batman and whatever. Or there might have been other executives that came in going like, yeah, but if we're not doing anything with Demon for, I don't know, whatever it is, 3-5 years or whatever, risks or problems could be had or whatever. And this is material that we still own and we're technically not making money on.
Right. There is a problem with something to do with trademark that it has to be published every so often in order to retain the trademark, or it has to go. You have to re-register it at some point. I remember talking to Dwayne
Something like that, yeah.
about it was something with the milestone stuff, that there was some hiccup with that. That he was.
In fact, again, this is pure guesswork on my end of it, but I was thinking about it the other day that the new Spider-Man movie that's coming out has the Hulk again. And I'm like, holy cow, how many Marvel movies is Hulk going to guest star in, basically almost as a co-star? Even Red Hulk in the latest Captain America movie. It was almost a Hulk movie as much as it was a Captain America. In fact, all the villains that I remember seeing, except for Thunderbolt Ross technically, but well, no, even that one, they weren't Captain America villains. They were all Hulk villains. Anyway, I was wondering, actually, in that same line of thinking, is it that so Sony, I believe, still owns the movie rights to the Hulk?
Right. No, Universal.
It's Universal. So Universal has it. Universal could make a Hulk movie, but if Marvel keeps putting Hulk in their movies, there's no space to breathe for an actual Hulk movie to come out that's going to compete with the Marvel movies. So this might be a way that Marvel is like Disney is squeezing Universal to be like, yeah, you think you own it, but we're still making all this stuff, and we're the ones who are making. I mean, I know they have to pay something to Universal to have Hulk in the movies, but the one thing that Marvel apparently can't do or has no rights to do, or they'd have to pay too much money to do, is to actually have a separate Hulk movie with itself as Hulk as the title.
Yeah, I don't know what the deal is, but I also think part of that is that he's sort of the last of the original Avengers around, so they want to milk that as much as they can. I think my guess is that they've discovered that killing all those people off might not have been the best thinking.
May have been a little bit problematic. By the way, the authenticity of this was really good. I like that.
We used to do that in improv and in comedy. When somebody was going too long, we'd just turn to each other in the audience and go. I was thinking, though, too, like, part of what made me think about this was not just Batman, but Star Wars, because it seems like the more Star Wars that comes out, the less money those things make. Because it was
those last movies weren't received very well. I think they made a fair amount of money, but I think the critics and everybody really gave them negative reviews over and over and over again. So then, and a lot of the views seemed to say like that Disney had jumped the gun, that they went too fast. They didn't plan out what they were going to do. They let too much of it kind of go like, well, we'll let this director do this and we'll let that director do that one. That's really hard to take and understand if you're trying to get one continuous story of a certain set of characters or something like that, especially in movie form, and especially if some directors all of a sudden in the middle might go like, yeah, everybody was going to the right, but I'm going to the left.
It's my vision now, damn it. I think that's what a lot of the feeling was around Rogue One, was that this is out of continuity and it's trying to solve a problem, but it's a way darker movie than we're used to.
It is darker movie.
I liked about it.
I like Rogue One a lot about it, and what it tried to do, and it tried so hard to fit within continuity. There were so many things it was trying to make sure it, Jenga, it's reverse Jenga into the whole thing of making it all work. That I thought in most parts that was one of the better ones that had come out of the new line of Star Wars books since Disney owned it. But But yeah, I mean, supposedly now they've taken their time. They're coordinating more, or whatever. I don't know. I think some of the executive situation is changing as well. So maybe some of the um, parameters or feedback on what to do about a movie may have changed as well. So Lord knows. But I'm sure on some level, all the Disney people and all of the stock owners and everything else, they're all going like, "Come on, let's go."
Yeah, we got this cash cow, and you need to milk it. Go back to this. But I thought when I was thinking about the years when Star Wars, Aliens, Indiana Jones, all that was coming out, the anticipation was a big deal. I mean, that was part of what really drove. You had to see that when it came out because it had been so long. You weren't inundated with the stuff all the way through. I mean, it was a different business. It was a different world then. There was
It was, but also all of those movies had to prove themselves at the beginning. None of those was a solid bet from day one. That they were all a really big risk, for their companies, or at least a fairly big risk.
The first ones were, but then
yeah,
they actually wanted the second Indiana Jones and the second Star Wars much faster than George gave them.
Oh, of course they did. Yeah, but it's those first ones that they have to gel and they have to hit right. I mean, I don't know about you, but for whatever reason, I was completely unplugged when my brother and my mom took me to go see Raiders of the Lost Ark. I had no clue, none at all. I think I had seen an ad somewhere with a guy with a whip. Meh, it looked okay.
That was exactly. I remember a friend talking to me about this new movie with Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, and I'm like, the guy's got a whip. It's kind of weird, isn't it?
I went and going like, all right, fine. We'll go see a movie. It's a Saturday, whatever it was at the time, and we'll pay our whatever $3-4 it was for a ticket back then. But then you leave the theater and you're on cloud nine, going, "Oh my God, this is one of the best films I've seen ever."
Yeah, I had no idea what that was about. I had no idea what Alien was about when I first saw it. I had a pretty good idea of Star Wars because I'd bought the paperback. And I read like the first half of it and I put it away because I need to save this for the movie.
When Alien came out, my mom thought it was just a sci-fi film. For whatever reason, she had no idea either. I had such nightmares from that movie. I was 10 or 11 years old. I was scared. I was actually in the theater doing that thing, going like, "Oh my God, oh my God," peeking through my fingers, but being so terrified all night long and having to have my dog sleep next to me. Otherwise, I couldn't sleep a wink, not one wink. Every corner that was dark. Oh my God.
My only experience was that the re-release of Little Big Man, which I for some reason I really wanted to see. I think it was a Western, and I knew like Buffalo Bill was in it, and for some reason I wanted to see that. So it was a re-release of it. I was like maybe 11. And I asked my mom, and she went with me to see it. And when they got to the scene with Faye Dunaway in the bathtub, she was freaking the shit out, as was I, in a completely different way. My father asked me how the movie was, and I said, "Great." And from the kitchen, it was filthy. He made me take him to a filthy movie. What did you do with all your toys? I'm talking to the dog.
Life was a little more honest then. It wasn't quite so sanitized. It wasn't quite so, litigious. All of those things, making sure that, everything's covered A to Z before you even open the book, before you even, sit down at the thing. We have to know everything in advance to what's going to happen with it. And now with the science fiction or fantasy toys or whatnot, they all want their stuff to be the toys to come out first. They want to do all those things first. It all has to, which spoils half of the movies nowadays when they do that stuff.
Yeah. There was the big thing with Civil War where they had the Lego set came out before the movie with Giant Man in it, and it completely spoiled the surprise for the movie.
Yep. But that's because other movies that they had bet their last dollar on making sure it was going to have all the money, like Godzilla or something like that. Then the movie tanked, and then no one wanted the toys afterward that they had figured out.
That's right. Except like 10 years later, all those toys will be worth billions.
Now they're all collector's items because they're so old, and nobody wanted them back then.
Try and find a Billy Zane Phantom figure these days.
That was an early lesson, actually, when I was at Valiant comics that I hadn't thought about, but that Shooter had talked about when we were there, because he was big on pumping up and telling all of us young noobs, how important this company was going to be and all these things going on. And to fight against the thought that we all had of like, yeah, but your books are only selling, I don't know what they were at the time, 20,000, maybe 30,000 early on. I know they got a little bit bigger in there, but whatever, all these, 20,000 print runs, which weren't much compared to Marvel and DC. And it's like, yeah, but when they're saying that their Age of this Superman issue or that issue or whatever is going to be worth $1 million later on, they're like, no, because there's 1 million copies of that book around. He goes, but there's only 20,000 or the 10,000 or 15,000 or whatever of this Valiant comic book. And assuming we do all the things right and we do, the job right, they're going to be worth a lot because there are only so many. There's a small number.
Yeah. He's probably. I haven't checked the prices, but he's probably right. I mean, for the fans, there's people who are going to go after that stuff. I think it went through their time when they were worth a lot of money. I don't know how much. I mean, I'm sure there were some now, but they'd be worth a whole lot more if Valiant had actually continued on and had become a Marvel Comics or DC Comics that would have had that continuity and everything going through. Oh yeah, those books would be worth a lot of money right now. Maybe not again as much as Marvel DC or whatever. They got 30 years to catch up on to be at the same age, but yeah, they'd have been doing great. It's just too bad that company wasn't able to hold through. I guess it was the falling market at the time of the 90s, the kind of comics crash that we had, the late 90s, that they weren't able to survive. Yeah, I was working at Malibu then, so, and I'm constantly surprised that not surprised. Yeah, I'm surprised that the rabid still fandom for Malibu. I mean, it's not huge, but there are people who really, there's a couple of Facebook groups and people just are really like, look, I finally got the Mantra issue I needed to complete my entire run of Malibu. And they're really into it. They really love it, which I find really interesting. Yeah. Well, it had almost like, sort of like, the different feel from Marvel Comics, from DC Comics before it. Both Valiant and Malibu, I think on different levels, had some of that different feel, like, kind of like what we know, but it's not the same thing. Solitaire was out there, or Freaks, or all these different Prime, all these different ones. And some of them, I think, they were solid enough ideas that they should have continued or whatnot, but they've just been bought and buried over time now that they're never going to see the light of day again, which I think in some ways makes the old issues a little bit more, sought after, or whatever it is, because Valiant keeps popping up every like 3 years or 5 years. Another company owns it, or they try again, or whatever they do. So there's a little bit of that. Some people can get that Valiant scratch that that they want, the itch that they want scratched. Yeah. There's constant talk on the Facebook groups about why Marvel won't do anything with the Malibu characters. I'm real close with Tom Mason, who was one of the bigwigs at Malibu, and he's constantly like, no, that's not why they're not doing it. No, it has nothing to do with creator rights. No, it has nothing to do with contracts. No, it has nothing to do with that. And I finally called him up one day and said, aren't you tired of like saying the same thing over and over again? He goes, yeah, but I've worked in comics since I was 22, so that's pretty much what I do. I didn't know you were at Malibu. What were you doing at Malibu? I was doing publicity stuff for Tom. I was doing it was a great freelance gig. I was called a consulting editor on their Malibu Sun, their internal magazine. And he every week he'd call me up and say, all right, this week you're going to talk to Gil Kane. This week you're going to talk to Leonard Peterson. This week you're going to talk to Howard Chaykin. It's actually how I met Chaykin. Sweet. Was interviewing him for Tom. And I got to talk to Gil Kane. I got to talk to Ernie Colon. I got to talk to Starlin. Wow. Everybody. I love that job. It was great. It was terrific. I told Gil Kane. Gil Kane asked me what I knew about theater, and I said, "Well, it was my major." And he said, "Did you see Bette Midler doing what the hell is it though? The Gypsy, Bette Midler doing Gypsy." And I said, yes. And Bette Midler is far too sexy to play Mama Rose. And there was a pause and I heard, my boy, that's very insightful, my boy. So afterwards, I called Tom and I said, I think Gil likes me. I scored an 11 on the Maboyo meter.
No, perfect that you had that background and everything. I think if I would have talked to Gil Kane, he would have been bored to tears with me.
I'm not sure he well, the theater thing helped, and the same with
Yeah.
Howard. Howard was the same. Was once he found out I was
Absolutely.
he called me, "You're an extraordinarily well-read young man." Okay, thank you. I'm very happy now because I worshipped Howard from like the time I was 11. I saw the
Yes.
Iron Wolf, and I was like,
Yep.
this is great, and I followed that guy ever since. So like he treats me. I'm very happy because he treats me almost as if I were an equal.
I think I actually saw his stuff a little bit earlier than that, though I hadn't, noticed it that much or recognized it. But it was him and some of those other guys at DC or whatnot were doing those little sword and sorcery books and stuff,
Sword
like
and
Fafhrd
Sorcery,
Grey Mouser, those kind of things
Yeah.
they were doing.
Yeah, I went and got those later. Like I just thought this guy was great. I thought this guy has watched all the movies I've watched, and I'm like 11, and it's not just all superhero stuff. So look, I like this guy,
Yep.
So that was my thing. I still think like if you have a character like Hawkman, what's it going to lose to do a 4-issue miniseries every year? And if it catches on, bring that creative team back and maybe do 6 issues the next year instead of letting these characters just take risks on some of these characters, like they're doing with the Absolute stuff. There's other characters you can risk stuff on
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. And they've got Martian Manhunter. I thought that was a cool choice to do for Absolute. That's not quite so mainstream or obvious or whatnot. And now they're doing Green Arrow and some other things. So I agree with you. I like those characters, sometimes as much, or if not more so, than the main ones that are floating around. When everybody, all my friends and whoever was reading comic books as a kid, they always like Spider-Man and they always like Superman. Those are the big ones. I like Captain Marvel, the Shazam Captain Marvel. And then I forget what I was into for the Marvel stuff. Oh, Iron Fist. I was big into the Iron Fist comic books instead of being at Spider-Man or then the X-Men or whatnot. I was always one of those that kind of veered away from what everybody else wanted to talk about.
There's a Shazam Pepsi glass up on my shelf up there. My son got me for Father's Day. My
Is it a
favorite
CC Beck?
Yep. It's
There you
the
go.
image from Shazam #1.
Hey,
I loved Captain Marvel. My favorite characters were Aquaman, Captain America, and Luke Cage.
nice.
Yeah.
Good grouping.
So what about you? What's your throw out for the day?
So mine, as you're a writer, that you brought up more words and things. Mine was more of a visual idea. So I went scavenging through. I'm at Jeff's house, and I didn't bring all my things, so I couldn't scavenge through my library of stuff. But I scavenged just a couple ideas. What a quick was the idea of just like versatility, variety. That there are different styles of ways of doing things. I think there's different ways that you can write stories. There's different ways that you can draw stories. You can draw them with, crazy detail and realism and all those different kind of things going on. But then, and some of these are going to mix in and out, you've got people that are much more stylized, obviously, much more maybe cartoony or whatnot. And each have their own strength and, usefulness in telling any of these kind of stories. Some of them people would think I don't have, but this one's a little more down. So I want to say I've got manga stuff here too. A lot of that is more, down to earth or average everyday things happening or sword fights or, these other ones trying to live in, ancient feudal Japan or something like that. And I just find that interesting as a reader and as myself I'm in the industry. So I made a post earlier in the week that was about this, and I just my title was just trying stuff. So I had a friend ask me recently about how what did I think? Why have I survived the years that I've lasted in the industry so far? Because if you last more than 5 years, you've done pretty good. If you've lasted more than 10 years or whatnot, now you're getting a more rarefied air. If you've lasted more than 20 years or something like that, then you're like in the rare club that most people don't last. And I think part of that has been, and I don't have the examples of my stuff handy, but is trying different styles, trying different story types, try different storytelling. Even the material itself, although most of my material has been superheroes or something akin to it. But heavy shadows, no shadows, realistic, a little bit more cartoony. All of these are that I'm holding up are great books. They
Yeah.
all have
Yeah. Yeah.
really cool stuff to them, fun stuff to them, but they don't adhere to one style or one way of doing things for any of these books.
The
So,
book itself doesn't adhere, or the different books don't adhere to one way of telling a story.
well, for long running books like, again, the Marvel DC books, like if we got Hawkman books, if you picked out 3 or 5 different Hawkman books of the past, you'll find them, they're all kind of superhero-ish, yes, but they'll run the gamut within that of, Joe Kubert is obviously very much different than Rob Liefeld, who had a run
Yep.
of,
Yep.
all these different guys in here who did stuff. So, and who's that other guy? I'm going to forget his name now.
Murphy Anderson.
Yeah, but no, I was thinking one of the other modern guys who was much more, he wasn't photo, but he was more like Bernie. It was very heavy and rich in shadows and that kind of stuff.
Snyder, John Snyder. Did he do it? Did he do Hawkman?
No. He might have. I'm going to forget the name and I apologize. But anyway, I think that's always interesting to play around with that stuff. I mean, technically, that's how I wound up with my Flash style. That did kickstart my second half at that point, or second part of my career. I had been doing stuff that was very much like Michael Golden and Alan Davis and John Byrne and that whole kind of family of stuff. And then realizing much of that, and Barry Smith and whatnot, realizing much of that was coming from Jack Kirby's or all of those guys, and Toth and whatnot. But then trying the Flash stuff where I omitted all the shadow work, which I had gotten to that, I'd gotten honed pretty good at a certain point. But I tried it in my sketchbooks and this and that, actually, while I was on Legion of Superheroes. I thought the style would actually work really well with that futuristic sci-fi thing, but I didn't get a chance to do it there. So I brought it to Flash, and slam bang, it worked really great. I, worked on that book for 3 years initially. I've been back to it a bunch of different times now. And there are different times when people will come back to me for a new book or this or that, and they'll say, could you try that in the Flash style and see how it works? I changed to a complete tonal style. With gray smudgings and everything else for Omega Flight, and I did it for Citizen Cold and JSA and a bunch of different things. That was much more pseudo-realistic style of doing things. I don't know if it matched the stories necessarily as much. And I usually try and let the stories dictate how my artwork's going to go, even if it's just leaning a little bit one way or another. My King Shark and my Solomon Grundy are very different from my Flash or different things. And I think that's just part of the fun of me being, a fan of this stuff for all along. I like all sorts of different material and types of stories. But I think, working in business. So I'm sure you've had to do it too in the writing in the different jobs you've done. You're writing your Batman cartoons is probably way different than other projects you've worked on.
Yeah. I mean, I've written Pinky and the Brain. I've written Batman. I wrote a German cartoon called Fix und Foxy about 2 talking foxes. I wrote an Italian cartoon called Bat Pat about amazingly a bat named Patrick.
Yeah.
And then I wrote, I rewrote a script by a famous comedian for Tim Allen at one point. So, it's a very different, they're all very different worlds, and you have to approach them a little differently. And now I'm getting to the point to where I'm kind of like, I'm not sure, do I want to just read scripts for a day job, or do I want to take a cartoon script that's kind of really outside of what I do anymore?
Right.
Because I don't know what it's doing for me. But yeah, I mean, it's just what you have to do. What about your identity as an artist and as a name? Do you worry about that at all? Or do you just, because your work is, I can look at stuff and go, yeah, that's Scott. And even though I can see the differences in it, but yeah, it's Scott. Do you worry about that at all? About your branding, I guess, is the 2020s term for it?
I generally didn't, because the feedback from the publishers was always very positive, or usually very positive, anytime that I had changed the styles and was trying different things. And in fact, I think in some ways, like I'm saying, that's what helped me to last from 5 to 10 to 20 years. That they go, oh, great, we can sell you now in this book, which is completely different. But there was a bunch where I've gotten feedback over the years with fandom but they're like, you drew Solomon Grundy? What? You did this book over here, and they're like, that doesn't look at all like you. So it can be confusing and all that, and maybe that doesn't help at different times because sure, you pick up an Alan Davis comic book, doesn't matter whether it's an Alan Davis comic book from 30 years ago or yesterday. It's not going to look that different. If you pay attention at all, you're going to pick out that style and still notice that it's him. So I don't know. Maybe in his way, it worked better in the longer run, but for me, it was definitely one of those tricks I think that was helpful to pull out of the bag to be able to go like, oh, right, we've got this other project. I'm going to do this one differently. It helps keep it interesting for me, but also it supposedly kept it interesting for the publisher. And I think overall, I would say for me it was a positive because besides Flash, none of those other styles ever clicked as well. So I think it would have, I think in some ways with me, thinking that I'd never reached that top tier of anything, that I think on some level people get tired of seeing the same thing for year after year after year. So for mine, I think it was good to ultimately change. But who knows? I mean, maybe I should have stayed on Flash for as long as I could during that time and pushed it to 5 years or something else. But I just know those other creators that did that. And even the ones that I thoroughly enjoyed for the first 2-3 years working on the book, that at some point you're like, this is not like it used to be. The little incremental changes, whatever else, the style changes, the types of stories that change or whichever, you somehow maybe the spark changed and maybe it's not quite your flavor. Maybe you still wanted root beer and now it's Dr. Pepper, or maybe now it's Sprite.
What do you think? Did that help you develop as an artist? Doing those different things to the
It totally did.
Yeah. How does it change how you look at something, like how you look at a page? Does it change the way you lay a page out?
Well, so there's the thing is what I'm saying in those first, 5-7 years, I was doing the traditional, to me, line work of something like Davis or Byrne or Golden or whatnot. And when I omitted that from what I was doing on the page, it wasn't necessarily that I was always going, I get, 3 hours extra per page. I can fly into the next one. Yes, in some ways it did make me quicker by not having to do all that and push that onto the colorist and see if they could really knock it out and do it. Some could, some couldn't. But at the same time, when I wasn't spending the time working on all those shadows and planning them out so they don't overlap or they cross the way I want them to and all those things, all that math, I realized I could spend a lot more time working on the layouts of the page of like, am I doing the dialogue the right justice by this panels? If the writer said, he's got 5 panels on the page, but panel 2 has dialogue that changes tone mid-sentence or changes this and changes that. There were tons of time then that Flash stuff where Jeff was a new enough writer, Jeff Johns was a new enough writer on the Flash stuff where I felt he doesn't do that so much anymore. But at the time, he would write a panel where someone would start to balloon and they'd be, hey, honey, I love you. I got to do this. And the second panel is, I'm so worried about this other thing. I have to leave and I've got to do it. And in old days, I might have been constrained and had to make that one panel, even with the shift in topic and everything else going on. Whereas there were times I specifically broke up some of his panels. So it was a 5-panel page. By the time I was done, I made it a 7-panel page or whatever, because I really wanted to make sure his dialogue sang and did what it needed to do. So I was constantly working on the storytelling. Is the downshot better here? Maybe not combined with this panel. That whole, again, that puzzle format of how do these panels work together to make an interesting page? All of those things, I spent way more time on at that point, which was great because I was like, oh, I learned shadows. I can put those aside right now. Now I can really just play with these toys. And I've only got 5 toys instead of 10 toys to work out the magic. And I can make those really 5 toys sing, or hopefully sing.
Right. What about, you get any pushback from like breaking a page from 5 to 7 panels? An editor I worked with would just completely lose his shit if the artist did that. And I'm like, I'm writing it. I have an idea in my head. I've read enough comics. Yeah. I have an idea in my head, but this is collaborative. So here, this is yours. Call me if you have a problem, but this is yours now.
Most of the time, no, I didn't get pushback on that because I felt like most of the writers, in fact, I think for a while there, writers were really appreciating me, and they were specifically asking for me on certain jobs because they saw that I was doing that extra work of making sure that whatever that writer had intended was coming out, hopefully in the greatest, strongest capacity that it could, or what I could do. But as long as I didn't like step beyond that, if I changed the way the dialogue was divided up and pushed it or whatever, most people were good with my instincts on that or agreed with them. But there were times past that where I feel like at times I was given a new writer where they'd be like, help this guy out kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, okay, but if I'm going to help this out and I really have to work on this and try and make it as best that I think it can be, well, then I don't see it just as A, B, C, D that he wrote. He actually forgot there's a B2 and there's a C3 in here that need to do this to flesh this out, or, play with it a little bit more. And sometimes then, yeah, I got pushback if I actually like reworked a little bit of what they did, a little bit too much or whatever. And there were times that, yeah, then because I'd gotten the habit of that and then I'd started writing some of my own stuff, that when I get those jobs, there were sometimes where in most cases I'm like, the writer wrote this, the editor approved it, everybody's good with it. I'm going to do the best I can with those ingredients I've been given and go with it. But there are times when, it's a creative endeavor, so you're going to disagree. And on some cases, I'd be like, I don't like that choice at all, but I'm going to play the game and I'm going to go along with and be a nice little team player. But there are other times that it really irked the hell out of me. So I'd be like, no, I don't want to draw that panel. That panel to me is completely the wrong choice. Kind of like what we were talking about with those Star Wars movies, that you've got Star Wars going a certain way, and then all of a sudden this other person comes in and goes, it'd be really funny is if we did this in a Star Wars movie. And you're going, why do we want really funny take in a Star Wars movie? And it was stuff like that, where I'd be like, that makes the hero look stupid or whatever else going on. And sometimes writers don't talk to me anymore.
Well, yeah. I mean, there are a lot of people who, I've got a whole bunch of thoughts. There are a lot of people who look down on the work and like, they don't like in animation really sort of drove me crazy, especially with the adventure stuff, is that it's all about, does this work? There's more to it than does it work. Is the plot working okay? There's characterization and sometimes the plot doesn't work, but the characterization is great, and you go with that because that's driving it. I'm always surprised that, by the way, Citizen Cold, I just read that like a month ago, and it is paced so beautifully. I mean, that thing moves like lightning, and it's not like a donut where you eat something and you realize you've had 3,000 calories and you still doesn't feel like you've eaten anything. It's really paced well, and it really tells the story really well, and visually it leans into telling a story visually. And I am always surprised when people tell me you think visually, and a lot of writers don't think that way. And I'm like, then why are they in this?
That's what I'm always curious too, when they're like that. And sometimes you read a script and you're like, I'm not sure what in the world to draw. And other ones where they have kind of thought it out. You can, even if they don't, draw it out or say anything I don't want, somebody are constantly telling me this is an over the shoulder shot, this is a 2-shot, this is a 1-shot. Yeah. I'm like, just tell me what's going on. I'll figure that part out. But then there's other scripts that I'll read without any particular stage direction or anything going on, but it's smooth and you can tell that I could just see it as they're talking it through. Yeah.
I directed a play a couple of years ago, and the lighting guy and the set designer, really, it had all this weird shit going on and lots of stuff coming in. And the lighting guy and the set designer during tech told me, it's great working with you because most theater directors are not visual. And I'm like, what? like
I don't know how that works.
How do you do that then? How do you and writing stuff like the stuff I'm working on with Jeff? I just do like what you say. I just say, here's the general scene of what's going on. If I have a really, really, really strong feeling like this should be an over the shoulder shot, I'll put it in.
Sure.
Better than that, I don't. I'm handing it off to a director. And I'm used to that. And sometimes I direct it myself, but I can't draw nearly as well as you guys can. If you want a comic book drawn by an 8-year-old, I'm your boy.
And again, if you've got all those ideas, especially the way I look at it now, earlier on, there's jobs I turned down because I would get the script and it would all have been nothing like every panel was a stage direction, like 100% nailed down. And I went, oh no, 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 because not only was it feeling like it was tying my hands up stuff, but also right or wrong, it felt like, because I wasn't in contact with the writer at the time, it felt like anything I did deviating or anything I may not have done quite right, that the writer was going to be all like, no, 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 no. I wrote this. It's got to be this, going to this. It's got to be the, and that's not fun. Um, I mean, it's totally the other end of the spectrum, but that's one of the reasons I liked working with Keith as much as I did, even though none of our books particularly sold well. But he was like the closest thing to I've had any sort of curation where it was like jazz, where he was like, he'd play a bunch of notes and he'd hand it to me. And he'd just hand it. And I'd be like, okay, but I'm used to feedback. So what if I play these notes next to the thing? And Keith's like, nope, nope, nope. Don't tell me.
Yeah.
Don't tell me. I don't want to know. I'm like, what? But I could do this thing. And he's like, go with it. I trust you. I'm like, really? And yeah, so much so that like even there were times when I think I mentioned on the show before, the editors would call me up while we were working on books because Keith wouldn't tell the editors what was going on. And they had meetings. They had to tell people. They had to explain to people what was going on in 3 months with the book or 6 months. And they even wanted some of those forms for a while. They were like, explain what's going on in the next 9 to 12 issues. Like, really? Like any of that's going to stay. It's good to have an informal conversation and be on the same page where we're going or whatever. But come on, 6 months later, all of these things could change. The way the industry could change, everything else going on. And you're going to tell me you want me to spend time formulating this thing to the last, dotted I and crossed T? Come on.
I met Keith the first time when I was writing Aquaman, and I was doing a signing, I think in San Diego, and he was sitting next to me, and we just introduced each other and doing the signing. And this guy comes up to the table, and he's got this diorama that's like this big, and it's the Justice Society table from the first cover with the Justice Society. Oh. And he's got G.I. Joes in absolutely perfect Justice Society costumes with a table that looked like he carved himself in the shield. And the guy walks up to the table, and I go, holy shit, that's cool. And I'm like, get like this. And Keith grabs my arm and pulls me down and says, he's just going to pull you into his little world. Don't do it. So when we're working on, when I hired him to do storyboards on Batman Beyond, I remind him that, and I talked about some of the work he was done, because I had a big stack of the Xeroxes of his layouts for Justice League.
Yeah.
And I would talk about the pacing of them and stuff like that. I'd say, how do you do it? And he said, I really don't know. He said,
no, he's one of those. He did not want to know the process or understand the process at all. He just wanted to just dive in, do it, and then you see what it's like when you get done. Let me let the dog in for a second, but keep talking.
I'm familiar with the let the dog in situation. He said, I counted out 22 pages of typing paper, and I sat it down and I started drawing the layouts, and it always works out. And I don't know how, and I don't really want to know how. I just want it to work.
Yeah, it's very much like that.
I mean, I loved those comics. I loved DeMatteis's dialogue. I loved McGuire's drawing on it. But really, the layouts were better comics. They were fucking amazing. They were like Kurtzman doing superhero stuff.
Well, and this is part of the thing. That's one of the magics of getting to work with those legendary guys like Keith, is that, as much as some people, I think later on, weren't appreciating him as much because he wasn't having the hits or whatever else was going on. But Keith was the real deal, man. I mean, he's the one he would do layouts for Alex Toth.
Yeah.
And when Keith stopped doing layouts for the book, it was a Green Lantern run or whatever it was. When Keith was like, oh, I'm too busy now, or he was having, I think, an argument with the editor about something. And Keith goes, fine. It's your book. You do your thing. I'll go over here and do this. When Keith quit the book, Alex quit the book.
Yeah.
And he did layouts for Wally Wood. I mean, he did layouts and he worked with people that, are bona fide legends besides himself, obviously.
Yeah.
With this industry, he's proven with all of that stuff. So, yeah, all of those books that I got when I worked on them with Beetle or Justice League or all different things that I worked with them on, Larfleeze, they were all great and cool. And again, the best part of it is Keith had no ego attitude about it at all. Because every one of those panels, he's like, this is like the best I could do, run with that. If you think of something better, great. Do it. Don't hold back. Do it.
I think he was the only problem I ever had with Keith is that Keith had freelancer's disease. Once you got him on the phone, just write off your afternoon. You're done.
Yes.
That's all you're going to be doing is talking to Keith. But that was a guy who knew who he was. He knew what his talents were. And you could talk shit about him all the time, and he knew you were wrong, and he just didn't care because he knew who he was.
Yeah, it seemed like he was never fazed by any of those. Well, obviously he's a human being, so he must have been phased by some of it or annoyed. But like even DeMatteis has that story that he tells early on. It wasn't about Justice League. I don't think it was about something else. I don't remember that specifics. But and Mark tells the story as well that he and Keith are just kind of like knowing each other a little bit, feeling each other out, whatever going on. And it was the origin of some character. I'm not gonna remember which one right now. But anyway, Mark runs into Keith in the DC office. They talk about stuff, and Keith goes, "Oh, there's this character we're gonna do. I figured it out. This is his origin." And he goes on for a whole, 15 minutes or whatever, going like, "This is the origin of this character. This is gonna be great. I think it was so much fun." And he ends it with, "What do you think?" And I don't know how close they were in their friendship from the beginning, but they even had this that Mark was like, "I don't like it." Keith, similar to the story I was telling about Jeff Johns recently about being a professional, Mark tells the story. Keith did not blink. Keith goes, "All right, what if we did this?" And then it starts riffing about something other plan or whatever else going on. And I think that one Mark said he did like or something like that. But it was like, "Oh, you didn't like? Fine, we're not doing great. Let's move on. Let's do Cherry. Cherry's a perfect choice. Whatever it is." He's one of those, and I told this, wrote down the story of Jeff Johns this last week, where people have asked me over the years at shows of like, what's the real definition of being a pro in the business? And that's one of the major ones to me. It's being on time and being a team player and all those things. Absolutely the usual things you hear of. But one of the things I'd never heard of before, but it's absolutely true in any of this entertainment business that I'm aware of. And I'm sure band members have to do it all the time, and anybody, stage people, whatever else. You have to be able to pivot on the spot. When your idea or your story or whatever it is doesn't work out and it's not the flavor that week or that month or whatever it is, or in that pitch meeting, you have to not stop and be upset about it and go, "Oh, you didn't like that? Oh, okay. Well, fine. Let's do this one instead." When I came back to DC in 2007, I had a conversation with Jeff Johns about some different stuff. And then Jeff said, "You know what? It's time for us to do a flash book together again." And I went, "Oh, that sounds great." Because it had been like 5 years or something like that. And I was like, "That sounds like heaven. Let's go ahead and do that." So we had a plan. It was going to involve Wally West, but then it was around time of Final Crisis. I'm giving you the crib short version. We get partway through the development of it. He's written part of the first issue. I've been doing some sketches of what we're going to do, whatever going on. And then in the middle of it, now this is Jeff Johns' project. He's written to giant crossovers for DC at this point, all this stuff. He's a bigwig. This isn't like, nobody. This isn't like any sort of regular writer being manhandled by the editorial thing. Jeff calls me up and says, "Project just got canceled." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? How? What?" And I spun my wheels in that direction. And we on the phone for maybe like 15 minutes. And Jeff goes, "I got an idea. Let me call you back." So book canceled. He calls me. We bitch about it for about 15 minutes. He goes, may have been 15 minutes, may have been a half an hour at the most. Jeff calls me back and says, "It's back on. It's greenlit. Here's what we're going to do." And he kind of reformatted it. He took out a major piece, what the problem was. He found out what the problem was that editorial had with it, why it got canned. Reformatted it. It was the Flash actually was the problem. And we turned it into Rogue's Revenge, where it was just the villains doing their villain thing and whatnot without the hero in it at all. And after we started in it and got going and gotten pages done and everything else, then both Jeff and I were like, this is better. We like this better. this turned out smoother. It's got this and that. We weren't sure in some ways what to do with Wally because this was about the time that they were going to reintroduce Barry Allen back into the DCU. So all these things, which was part of the editorial problem, was that they didn't want stuff that was going to confuse the readers about who was the Flash.
Right.
But there are always going to be these changes. There's always going to be problems or things, especially with this long-standing property. You may have the next I want to say immortal. It's not immortal. It's absolute. The next absolute Batman or whatever it is, but 6 months, 9 months, 12 months later, whatever it is, there will all of a sudden maybe a seismic shift with the plate tectonics, and then you can't do that anymore. Something's happened. There could be legal reasons. There could be all sorts of different things. Whatever it is, don't take it personally. Dive, move on. When I worked on the Beyond miniseries with Dwayne McDuffie, another genius, before I was attached to the project, Dwayne had gotten it greenlit without an artist attached, as I understand it. But it was a 12-issue series. I think at least 9 or 12 issues. And then right at the time that I was offered this thing and I accepted it, Dwayne was actually upset a little bit because it had just been knocked down to a 6-issue miniseries. And he had apparently all planned out. He did have all 9 issues planned out and everything else. He's like, what am I going to do? And he was all kind of frustrated with that stuff. And I understood that. And we talked about that for a while. But at the same time, either because of those editing pieces or because of some pieces that Dwayne's a really good collaborator. So he goes, I've still got some things. We could do this and we could do this and this and this that I haven't worked out yet. What do you want to do? And I went, oh, handy. Let's go. And we figured out some pieces that were, they're background details. We got to throw Dragon Man in for no real good reason. We got, a bunch of those things that were just like fun walk-ons or different things we could do. But we also, I suggested to him, because he only had the sort of B-level characters. We had Hank Pym, we had Wasp. We did have Venom, who was A-class, but he wasn't so A-class maybe at that moment. Who else was in there? Medusa from the Inhumans was in there. He wanted Deathlock in there. And there was this other guy, the Hood, I think he's called. He's got a cape and a hood. And he gets like demonically taken over.
Cloak?
No, it wasn't Cloak and Dagger, no. Anyway, but most of them I was like, but you still, Venom's the closest thing you have, but Venom wasn't like a linchpin for the story either. Venom was just one of the villains, which I thought was great, that he wasn't, the centerpiece. Right. But I said, we still kind of needed a centerpiece. We still, be nice if we had an A-level character at the center of this, somebody, Captain America, Spider-Man, something like that, to really bring in the fans so they don't ignore our book. He goes, yeah, but I don't want to, because then it'll change the tone of it, and it's going to be about them, and I won't be able to do anything because it's a main level character, but they have their own books, and it'll just be status quo. And I went, not if our hero really isn't the hero, or some other thing with it. He goes, what do you think? And I go, let's make it Spider-Man, but it's not Spider-Man, it's someone in disguise. And he lit up and he's like, perfect. And then he ran with the rest, and we did all that stuff. But making those changes, running with it, and being a collaborative person, working with those things, whether you like the change or not, is massively important to doing any of these creative jobs.
Yeah, the last couple rounds of comics I did, I always got something got cut. Like I was working way ahead. Like Aquaman, I was working like a year ahead or something like that.
Oh, wow.
And so, because I had tons of time and they kept pushing it back. And so when I got to issue 8, I had issue 8, we need a crossover with Superman. We need to have Superman in the book. So I wrote it, and it was really hard to shoehorn him in to it. And I liked the character a lot. I love Superman, but it's hard to shoehorn him into an Aquaman story, really, unless it's Justice League. And I turned it in. They liked it. No problem. About a month later, issue 8 is going to be Batman, because Batman Returns is coming out at the same time. So you have to rewrite it, which is if you had told me that in the beginning, he's easier to shoehorn into the Aquaman world.
Sure.
Because, he's not going to solve everything by being faster than everyone else. But he presents other problems, like DC's thing that Batman has to be the coolest, strongest, smartest guy ever. Yeah. And I had him sneaking up on Aquaman and Aquaman backfisting without looking and knocking him off the building. And Batman saying, I always forget how strong he is. And they said, You can't do that.
Nope.
You can't knock Batman off the building. And I said, issue 1, Aquaman punches through the side of a submarine. And I did that on purpose because nobody ever talked about how strong he's got to be to do this. Like, it's Batman. You can't do it to Batman.
Yep.
And then
sometimes those disagreements don't work. Sometimes you do reach an impasse or whatever, or you have to roll with something that you're not that fond of. But
right.
But yeah, it's one of those things. On Solomon Grundy, I picked most of the villains. We quickly came up with a theme that he was going to fight another villain every issue as he went through his major story arc. And I picked some of them, and then DC listed some of them that they wanted. One of them actually they had asked for was Lobo, and I was like, no clue what. And thankfully, I had some help in editorial people around that went like, they talked about it. So we didn't do Lobo, but at the same time, one of the other people that was brought up was to deal with just some previous Solomon Grundy stuff that I really wasn't that much into. But it was fairly popular stuff. It was with Tio Maro.
Oh yeah, Doctor. Yeah.
He was involved in the Justice League story with Grundy that was all about that they both like live forever or whatever kind of thing going on or something like that. So then I was told to do something with that part of the story, put it as one of the pieces. And I'm like, again, I don't know what to do. But my editorial people backing me up. They're like, no, you got one change. We got rid of Lobo, but we can't get rid of this one. And I went,
right.
Okay. So then I don't know if I spent a weekend or whatever thinking about it. And as it turned out, as the issues went along, it's one of my favorite ones of the bunch. I did not think it had legs on it. I didn't think it was going to do anything interesting or whatever going on with it. I got to put in Amazo because it was linked in with the Tio Maro stuff and everything else.
Yeah.
I loved using Amazo. That was perfect. And then, all the other stuff about dealing with life being eternal or the curse of being eternally living kind of thing, which also I think comes up with the Grundy stuff. It turned into one of my favorite ones. And I was sure that issue was going to just suck.
Now you need to do the sequel to that and add Vandal Savage in.
Yeah.
Oh, we hit an hour, just the two of us, and the dogs. So, any last roundup for this? I really enjoyed this. I thought it was really great, especially talking about changing your style and how that grew. You grew to having to do that.
Well, all these topics, I think, whether we didn't plan it or not, but even yours about the material, how does it last? Can you bring it back? All of those different things. Like at different times, I'll have to bring back an art style or whatever it is. Or like we talked about last week about pitches, is that you never know when you are going to be asked for a Flash Gordon pitch or something from long ago to revisit it, to do whatever you need to do. Yep. Or if you're in line with Marvel, DC, or whatever, that they're trying to figure out what's the latest thing, what we can do with Cap next week, Captain America or something like that. So this all fit in great. And yeah, boy, you just get me started and I can blab and we all can,
but you're smart and funny. So that's it for this 12-cent Treehouse. Thanks everybody for sticking around with us. Next week we will be back with a different assortment and perhaps even at a different time, but watch social media and we'll keep in touch.
I was about to say we might have to make a little couple changes here, whatnot. All the same people are involved. But we have to roll with the changes. We got to see when somebody gets a day job or somebody that happens. We got to roll with it, and we stay tuned.
Yeah, but the show is always available on YouTube, on the 12-cent Treehouse channel, and also on my channel, Chief Jack Shakespeare. So we put them up, and they live forever. Take care, everybody. See you next week.
Thank you. Good night.